Hey there, everybody. This is your instructor, David Weber. Welcome to my makeshift video studio. I'm propping up my phone on a shelf on the edge of the kitchen here. And let's do the last lecture, or I should say the lecture for the last topic that we need to cover. Now, this is a lecture for week 5, but really it's week 6, because one of the weeks was going to be the week we were going to be in the Rotra visit, but of course that never happened because of the daggone coronavirus. I hope you guys are doing well, by the way. I don't know how you're bearing up with the quarantine, but I hope you're comfortable. I hope you're safe and warm and healthy. I know that this whole online instruction process is, for many of you, kind of stressful, very new. Believe me, we feel the same way as the instructors. I've been in constant contact with most of my colleagues in the Communication Studies program, the other instructors, and as well with my colleagues from my own university in the United States. And just about everybody, except a handful of people that I know who have taught online exclusively or primarily or a great deal for years. Everybody else is scrambling and struggling, so it's not an easy time for anybody, instructor or student. But we're hoping that that you'll roll with it a little bit and be flexible and patient. And because I think that's the best any of us can do, no matter what our role is. So let's do this last lecture on for the course. This is pertaining to portfolio item 5. Now, portfolio item 5 was not listed in the document that I shared with you the other day, and I said as much because we have to do this lecture first. I will send along the PowerPoints for this lecture, and I'm going to be following those, so you can kind of, perhaps as you're listening, follow along with the PowerPoints, and we'll go from there. But anyway, portfolio item number 5 asks you to demonstrate your familiarity with a couple of concepts that are at the heart of organizational effectiveness, organizational communication. And these are KPIs, key performance indicators, and ROI, return on investment. We're going to talk about that because in your lives as specialists working with members of organizations of any kind, you're going to hear this kind of terminology quite a bit. So it definitely qualifies as an essential in organizations. So the first word to talk about here is the word accountability. And accountability means to take responsibility for achieving specific results. If you say, I will be responsible for increasing the number of sales in the next 3 months by X percentage, if you say, I'll take responsibility for that, well, that means you will be accountable for the results, whatever they may be. And personally, I think accountability and taking responsibility is the heart of what it means to be a dependable professional. If you achieve the if you achieve the results, if you accomplish the objectives, hit the targets, that's great. How did you go about doing it? In what ways did you go about achieving those results? And if you missed the targets, if you didn't accomplish the objectives, what would you have done differently? What can you do differently next time? These are the kinds of questions that that an accountable person, a person who embraces accountability, those are the kind of questions that he or she willingly answers, even though they're not always easy to answer. And accountability, as you can imagine, accountability is easier the simpler or smaller the goals are. When they get to be complex, when they get to be maybe even a little bit abstract, accountability sometimes is easier to avoid But on the other hand, the person who's accountable for complex results is the person who really is or can be kind of a hero. One of my favorite examples of this was many years ago, back in the 80s. I lived in Japan, and at the time there was a very sad, tragic plane crash. Really affected, it was a domestic flight, so everybody on the flight, virtually everybody, was Japanese. And it was one of those terrible events where out of the, couple hundred, 300 people who were killed, it seemed that everybody knew someone who was on the flight, or knew someone who knew someone on the flight, or knew someone who had a relative on the flight. It was one of those things. Well, a few days after the crash, the president of the airline resigned. And he said, it happened while I was president. I wasn't flying the plane. I was not directly involved with any of that, but I was the boss. I'm accountable for such terrible things when they happen. I'm going to resign and let someone else take over. And he got some criticism for that because, why do it? But I thought it was a very bold sort of a thing to do. It was definitely an indication or an illustration of accountability to the extreme. Another term is performance. Individual performance and organizational performance. And this means the results that you accomplish. You do your work and you get some results. Well, the quality of those results is an indicator of the quality of your performance. And you know this as students. The grades you earn are indications of the quality of your performance as a student. It's true in organizations too. And then we can talk about an organization's performance when we think in terms of the sum total of all of the performance achievements of all or most of the members of the organization. I mean, we can say that this organization performs really well when all or most of the people tend to have the kind of results that they wanted to achieve and that their bosses wanted them to achieve. And we can say an organization is not performing well when the opposite is happening. Another term is control. So control is the process by which managers or executives in an organization ensure that activities are completed in line with objectives, that activities are completed in a manner that enables the organization's objectives to be met. And control is a process of comparison. What's the ideal? What are the desired results? Let's see how effectively or not those were pursued and accomplished. Well, that's an issue of what's called control. And as I said, control is fundamentally an issue of comparing. And there's what's called the control process. And it's, just about 3 steps. Well, the first step is performing. And then measuring that performance. The next step is comparing that actual performance to the desired results, and then taking action to either reward or compliment those responsible for meeting or exceeding the goal, or corrective action to try to hit the goal next time if we make these changes. And this whole process of control is really the heart of what it means, or very close to the heart of what it means to be a manager. We talk about motivation and leadership and empowerment, all of these things that leaders and managers are supposed to do. But fundamentally, the way that you as a leader, as a manager, as an executive start to think in terms of how am I going to motivate? How am I going to encourage? Whom am I going to encourage? What am I going to say or not say? Much of that comes from the control function where you measure desired results against actual results, or the other way around. Another term of use here is KPI, Key Performance Indicator. Now, the three words that I like to associate with KPI are observable, measurable, and actionable. What does that mean? Well, observable means you can see it, you can hear it, you can taste it, you can touch it. It's observable, it's tangible. Measurable means you can put a number to it. You can know if what you see is more or less than what you want to see. What you hear is louder or softer than what you want to hear. If it's more or less than what you want to hear. Actionable is, to me, the most important one of them all. Actionable means, based on this information about observable, measurable conditions, based on that, I can take a specific action, and ideally, that action is going to lead to the kind of results that we want within this organization. So KPIs are observable, measurable, actionable, quantifiable, that's measurable, measurements that you can use to analyze organizational performance. And the KPIs have to align with organizational strategy and goals. You know what those are from Lecture 1 and Lecture 2 in this module. So an organization has many, many KPIs. It'll depend on the organization, but there are lots of KPIs. The more KPIs, the better in some respects. You know, there's a very famous American baseball executive who revolutionized baseball about 20 years ago. And again, you don't have to know much or even care much about baseball for this illustration. But, you know, baseball, you know enough about baseball quite likely that I can tell you that one of the important things to do is to take a bat and hit a ball. So someone throws a baseball at you, you're standing there with your bat, and you hit the baseball. Okay, fair enough. Well, for 100 years or more than 100 years, 150 years, one key performance indicator was how many times the players on the team hit the ball. And, you know, the more times you hit the ball, that's a key performance indicator that this is probably a good team. The more balls that get hit by a team, the better the organizational performance, the better the individual performance. If one or another player hits the ball a lot, like if a player hits the ball 3 times out of 10, that's considered, oh my gosh, that's incredible. So this particular executive, whose name was Bill took that KPI of how many times players hit the ball, and he added depth and subtlety to it. So it wasn't just, here's a player, let's call him Joe. Joe hit the ball 50 times in 2 months, just to make up a couple of numbers. Not just that key performance indicator, but how many times did Joe hit the ball to his left? How many times did he hit it to his right? What was the speed of the pitch, the ball thrown to him? At what speed was the ball thrown to him? You know, because balls can be thrown at, like 100 kilometers per hour or 120 kilometers per hour. How fast was the ball thrown that he hit to his left? And all of these very subtle key performance indicators started to indicate how effective Joe's performance really was compared to everybody else's on the team. Fascinating stuff, and it revolutionized baseball because those key performance indicators were taken up by all the other organizations that played professional baseball at the highest level, highest professional level. And now it's very common to have these very sophisticated KPIs, and decisions are made by them on who to hire and who to fire among the players. So that's just an example of how KPIs come into play in the organizational world, in this case of professional sports. Now, if you're a communication specialist, there are some KPIs that are typical of the ones that you'd be responsible for dealing with. One example would be media stories. Now, if you're a public relations or a marketing specialist, one of the things you may be responsible for is ensuring that more rather than fewer stories that appear in the media about your organization, if you work for an organization, are positive. So you'd start tracking the number of stories, and let's say that you're a stakeholder, a member of XYZ Corporation. Well, you'd start paying attention to all the news stories that appear in newspapers and magazines and on cable news shows and news websites, news aggregator websites. And you'd say, okay, gosh, in the space of 3 months, 1,000 stories were there. Well, the number of stories, that could be a key performance indicator. More likely, it's going to be along the lines of how many stories were positive and how many stories were not, or how many passages in all of those stories were positive statements about the organization and how many passages made negative statements about the organization. And if you start juggling all of that statistical, measurable, observable stuff, you can take action on it. The action could be maybe to, get friendly with the journalists so they'll print better stories about you. The action could be to make sure that people don't do that which led to the negative passages or the negative stories. So these would be examples of how KPIs relate to the work of what you're studying to do. And that's just one tiny example, this issue of media stories. Another idea to play with is this idea of return on investment, or ROI. And that means the money that you put out as an organization, the money that you green light, that you give thumbs up to spending if you're an executive or manager. Is that money going to give you a return that you like? So what do we mean by that? Well, let's take a very simple example. Let's say that a computer system in your organization malfunctions, and you discover that it's going to cost a certain amount of money to fix it, and a certain amount of money to buy a whole new system. Now, the question is, we could spend less money to repair it, but what if 5 years down the road we have to spend the same amount of money to fix it? And what if that plus what we spend now to fix it is less than what it costs to buy a new system now, even though that would cost more than fixing it now? And you juggle the thinking about this to see if the return is going to be worth it. Because maybe if you use this new system, you can double the amount of work you can put out. Let's say it's a printer. The newest printers will print out 1.5 times as much as that older printer that needs to be repaired. And maybe printing out all that material might lead to faster turnaround on a project. So these are calculations that all revolve around this concept of return on investment. And on one hand, some people say, well, ROI is solely about money. If I expend money, if I use the resource called money, I got to get a return on it that's financial, that's monetary. But realize that return on investment for an organization could be something like an increased awareness of the organization or an improved image. And that's not a directly, or I should say immediately, financial return, although ultimately even something like that can be converted to a kind of financial gain, a kind of a profit. And a good example of this is happening right now. I'm sure you know Walmart by name. I don't know how many Walmarts there are in Europe, but you've probably heard the name. So Walmart agreed that a certain percentage of its stores throughout the United States would allow a certain section of their parking lots to be used for stations where coronavirus testing could be set up. So doctors and physicians and nurses would sort of, stand in these sections of parking lots, and people could come in and drive by and have the test take place. Okay, so that's nice. That's great. But so here's what happens. So you got a big parking lot, capacity for, let's say, 1,000 cars. 1/4 of it is sectioned off for the testing. That means only 700, 750 cars now can park there. Someone comes by, drives up to Walmart because he or she wants to buy some food at Walmart, sees that the parking lot is filled except for that section that's walled off or sectioned off for testing. But it might as well have, 250 cars in it. It's not available. There's no place to park. So the person says, oh, there's no place to park at Walmart. Geez, I'm just going to go down the street to Lidl. We have those. We have Aldi's now in America, too. I can get the same kind of stuff there. And, on one hand, you think, oh, my God, McDonald's, you're crazy. If only you had allowed for the 250 cars to park there like they normally would, this guy or girl would have, pulled into Walmart and bought food from you. Well, okay. 6 months from now, when I hope all this coronavirus stuff is behind us, the same guy is driving down the street, or girl is driving down the street, comes to McDonald's. He or she's accustomed to passing McDonald's now and going to, Aldi about a block, half a kilometer away. But this person says, Walmart, they were doing such good work during the coronavirus thing. I want to kind of, support them. And even though I'm going to spend a little bit more for what I buy here at Walmart than what I would spend at Aldi, I'm going to spend that money at Walmart because, gosh darn it, they were here for us in this coronavirus mess. So suddenly that reputation, that image of being helpful to the community pays off in a financial return on the investment of, sectioning off the parking lot. So that's the lecture for the day. Brought it in just under 22 minutes. I was hoping to maybe hit 18 to 20. But I look forward to seeing you guys sooner rather than later. And stay strong, stay healthy, stay safe. And we'll see you soon.